Hello everyone. So in this tutorial, which probably won't be super long, I'm going to cover some different material properties that you can set and view for a part. So to start with, I've just got some part that I modeled. This is a brake rotor for something I had to make a replacement part. So I made this part, and when you just draw it, it's just geometry, but I'm going to make it out of a material. It's going to have material finish on it. It's going to have mass properties, and that's all things that I can either set or analyze in NX. And that's really all I'm going to cover today. It's just how you look at different properties of something that you've drawn or set some different properties. So probably one of the first things that's really handy is measurements. So if I go to the analysis tab here and do the measure command, this is something that's fairly new, this version of measure. Really it's kind of took me a little while to figure it out, but basically all you have to do is click what you want to measure. So if I wanted to know this radius out here, I can either click this line or this surface, and it will tell me the surface area of that, the perimeter, the radius. It kind of just tries to measure everything possible from what you've selected. So if I want to know the distance between this surface and this interior surface, I just select those and it adds them to this list, and then it tries to figure out every different calculation that you could possibly want between those two objects. In this case, really the only thing that's probably useful is the minimum distance, so it's giving us that. I can go back, click here and delete this, and then I can measure to something else. And it's this really kind of crazy powerful system for doing measurements here. There's a lot of options you can dig into as well, but you can build in all of these different measurements, and you can pick all sorts of different things to measure from. It's something that takes a little bit of playing with, and it allows me to find, if I wanted to figure out the distance between this surface and this surface, right? All I have to do is click those, and it tells me the minimum distance between those. So that's a really handy thing to have to be able to measure things on your CAD model. So that's measurement. Another common thing you're going to want to do is set your material properties. So for stress analysis, for just figuring out how heavy something is, you need to set material properties. So I'll show you a couple things first. There's a lot in NX. I mean, really, I'm just doing maybe a few percent of this entire program. It can do so many things, it's really overwhelming at times. So if you forget where something is, or if you want to see if it has something, you can come up to the search here and just search for what you're looking for. So if I do material, you can see it gives me all these different commands. And what I want to do is assign material. And that brings up this dialog. And I'll show you where it's buried in the menu if you actually want to find it from the menu. But all I need to do here is pick the body. So it's asking me to select the body. So I select the body, and it already has some materials in it. It's kind of a random list of materials, to be perfectly honest. But there's some stuff that's close, like aluminum 6061 is a common. It's actually what this part's made out of. So I can select the material and then click apply, and it will set that material property. You can create materials too. So if you want to create a custom material, you can create your own material and save it to be available for all your different parts you're going to draw. So most things you're going to be doing isotropic materials, and the main thing you need is the mass density and Young's modulus, Poisson's ratio. These kind of things you can actually find. You start getting into nonlinear materials, and you start needing a bunch of really technically complicated stuff really fast, as you can see from some of this. So, but for just doing linear finite element analysis or just mass properties, really the density is the main thing here. So you can add materials to the library, or if you wanted to get into all this gory stuff too and do nonlinear analysis, you can do all that too. So, so that's setting material properties. Once you set material properties, then you can then find the mass properties of your part. This is something it's relatively new in this version, newer versions of NX. So let me show you where materials are first. So if you go to menu, let's see, I believe it is, I always forget, that's why I have to search, tools, material, assign material, and that's where that's hiding. And if you didn't see what I did, there's this whole menu thing that you might not have seen yet that's got a million things buried in it here. So it kind of gets into the whole NX can be incredibly overwhelming at times, but the other side of that is NX can do anything. So, so define mass properties. It's actually not something. Sorry, spelling it wrong, but it's a dialog that opens up over here. So let me just search for it to not waste any time. If you do mask and then do show mask property panels, it should, when I come up to, I'm in the wrong navigator. I was in assembly. I need to go to the part navigator, and then I can come up here to mask, show mask properties panels, and it'll add this mask property panel over here to the part navigator. And it's not going to be in some of these other windows. It will be in the assembly navigator, but it's not going to be in the constraint navigator. But in the part navigator, it'll add this mask property panel. And all I have to do now is select a solid body. So let me check my selection filter. So I'm going to right click out here, set my selection filter to solid body. So it's going to actually let me pick this solid body. It's going to give me this little dialog here. And it took me a while to figure this one out too. You had to expand this window a little bit so you can see the commands, and then you can hit update, and it will actually go through and calculate all the mask properties. And so all the stuff you learn in dynamics and mechanics materials about how to calculate stuff by integration and do moments of inertia, this all automates for you, which is really nice. So this is a 0.55 pound part, or 0.55 lbfs. Weight, density comes from your material properties. It gives you your volume here, gives you your surface area. Center of mass location is given here from the origin of your coordinate system. And then here's the coolest thing, mass moments of inertia. And it tells you over here where it's measured from, right? From design. And you could pick, I guess there's really many options right here, but let's really make this bigger. So I don't think you could change that, but this looks like it's giving from the center of mass. You got to be careful about where it's telling you things from. Sorry, I'm kind of going off the plot here. But it at least it's very powerful in what it can provide here. Just what you do with it, you have to be careful. It's measuring things that it's measuring from the place you want it to be measuring from. I mean, I can tell from the XX and ZZ being the same, but I think it's measuring from the center of mass. Products of inertia are all zero. It has 2 planes of symmetry, so they're all zero. You'll learn that in dynamics and mechanicals. And there's some other mass properties here, radius and gyration too. So it's really, really powerful being able to just super quickly calculate this for a body. You can actually do it for an assembly too, for a whole assembly. So really, really powerful. You do have to set density for that, but for steels, even if you don't have like the exact steel alloy it has in the materials that are built into it, that's something that you can do basically any steel. They have roughly the same density and Young's modulus and everything else. The same is true for aluminum. So you could actually be really close. If they didn't have the exact steel, you don't have to add material if you're just trying to find mass properties. Okay, so what about display? So NX kind of defaults to things being displayed in whatever this color is, kind of a almost bluish light gray. And it's obviously that's something you might want to change. So if I'm in the part navigator, I can just take something, and let me get rid of my selection filter here. I can just highlight a feature, right click, and then assign a feature color. So I can say, so it defaults to no color. I can change it to a specific color and then pick from a color picker here, right? And it colors that feature. Now it's just that feature, so it's not all of the part. So I can go through each feature here and set a color for that if I want different parts, different things to be different colors on the part. I can also set the color for the entire part, and I forget where this is buried, but it's object color, edit object color, and it's buried in one of those menus here. You can find it if you look for it, but the search is your friend. It's actually a helpful search. Some programs don't have helpful searches, and X is pretty helpful. So you just pick the object. You can actually do individual surfaces too, or you can select an entire solid body. And then in this one, you have to actually click OK, and then it'll let you pick your color. So now I can set the color of this entire part to being some color. So now whenever I do any kind of features on this later on, they'll still be all this same color. So no, that's more for helping you identify parts in your CAD model, but for like actually making it so if you wanted to do a rendering and have it look like a high quality part, NX has a studio renderer that's very, very powerful. And it's a whole different set of material properties that are the actual real surface finish. So this edit object color is more for you just color coding different parts for different reasons. Like if you had a tube frame and you had different thickness tubes, you could assign different colors to different thicknesses just to help you organize it. But when you go to actually render it, you might want them to all be bare metal or carbon fiber or some kind of painted finish, right? So NX has got a studio renderer that's very, very good. So you need to go to the render tab, and if you don't have these material properties tabs, which by default I don't think you'll see them there, you need to hit Advanced Studio, and it will pop these tabs up here, and these are the studio materials. And you can see I've already added carbon fiber to this thing, but you can go into System Studio Materials, and there's all sorts of really good default materials here. I mean, leather. And look at all the different kinds of leather. It's really insane what material properties they've gone through and added. Gemstones. I mean, we can make this part out of diamond. And it doesn't look very interesting right now because this is just this isn't the studio renderer. This is sort of a work view. To actually render it, you need to go into rendering and let me kind of, oh yeah, Ray Trace Studio. That's the actual real rendering engine. So all I need to do is get materials, my studio materials set, flip over to Ray Trace Studio. It's going to open a different dialog window, and then it's going to Ray Trace render this. And now you can actually see it's kind of doing the translucency right. So I mean, this would be a diamond break rotor. The longer you let it run, the better. This is it uses NVIDIA iRay, I believe, which runs really good on NVIDIA graphics cards. If you don't have an NVIDIA graphics card, it's going to run on your processor and it might be slow, but the bigger, badder NVIDIA graphics card you have, the better this actually works. So there's some preferences up here. You can change the background too. And at some point in time, you can pause it and then save an image if you wanted to do renderings of the part. So it's a really powerful render. It really looks neat when you get into big assemblies. You can change all sorts of things in here. You can apply decal stickers if you wanted to do texturing. You can change the background too. I can't remember where that's at. And if some of the stuff's not showing up for you, remember to go into roles, content, advanced, and that makes sure everything's shown, because there's some stuff that can be hidden if you don't do that. That's just something it's easy to forget about. Let me scene preferences. Oh yeah, scene preferences. Here we go. So now we could do an environmental map. Let's see if it's got some built in. So now we've got an environment map that'll provide a little bit better reflections. We could put some lights in there. We can pick our different environment image map, and we can pick what kind of shadowing it's going to do. So let's see if we render this now, what it looks like. It should have the environment map, which should be better. Yeah, here we go. Now we have an actual environment map instead of generic background lighting. You know that it really slowed down. My desk computer is terrible. It doesn't have a graphics card in it, so it's running really slow. But I'm going to go ahead and stop this, and we can flip over to a different material just so you can see what that looks like. I'm going to kill my poor computer. It's trying to record these slides and do rendering all at the same time. But all I have to do is go into put a different material property on. So this is going to be a metal, aluminum 6061. There we go. Assign it to the part. And then now I can render this. Oops, actually, I may just assign that surface to be aluminum. Let me, when in doubt, change your selection filter to what you're trying to assign. And then now it will assign it to the whole part. That saves you some grief. And we should be able to render it in aluminum. And you can see it's got, this is a nice reflective aluminum, but you can do a brushed finishes too. And this will do ray tracing with shadows and proper light balance. And you can do really about as good as close to photorealistic as you can get with this kind of stuff. So really, really powerful render. So those are your studio materials. You've got your display materials that when I kick out of Advanced Studio, you can see now all of a sudden it's back to being its ugly green here. When you right click, you can change the rendering style. Sometimes you have parts that have internal geometry that you can't see, and you flip over to static wireframe and it shows you all of the wireframe geometry, so you can select internal things here. So if I set my filter down here to curve. I can maybe edge. Yeah, edge. I can pick these internal edges maybe that I couldn't click before. You can click over to Studio, and there's other options here. Shading with edges is probably the most helpful. It's hard for me to demonstrate, but sometimes you start drawing and make a really big part, and then NX like clips the view and you can only see part of it, and it's really frustrating. All you have to do is right click and do fit, and it will rescale the rendering to that, and it'll help when you've got tried. Basically it's in my experience is when you start in inches and you draw a part that's like many feet or hundreds of feet long, and it's like it can't show part of it for whatever reason. You just have to right click and then do fit. And there's some OpenGL rendering stuff behind the scenes that's going on there that I understand what it is. It's clipping planes, and it just has to change the clipping planes. That's just one weird quirk NX has sometimes. You can change your background here. You can do a whole dark theme for the program. You can do a lot. That's actually kind of nice. I like it. So that's just a little bit about material properties, mask properties, measurements, rendering that you can play with in NX. It's some really fun stuff. You can do ground shadows. You can put a ground plane in there. You can do about as close to photorealistic as possible. iRay's a really, really good quality renderer. So in fact, there's really not much better than that. So it's a really nice thing to have. There's also another mode. Let me see if I can find it. There's a VR toolbox where you can actually look at these parts in VR. And I saw it earlier. I can't remember. Oh, there it is. It's under View. So if you go in View, there's actually a VR renderer, so you can use a VR headset. And I've not played with this. I've got an old Oculus DK2 that I might try playing with this at some point in time. But that's really pretty neat. I don't know how well it works, how easy it is to use. For those of you that have headsets, that might be something really fun to play with. You have to have a headset that lets you use custom programs like this. It's not like the ones that are all locked in and you have to buy stuff in the store. It's not going to work. But that's something, if you've got a headset, you might play with. It's probably going to be pretty cool. Actually, I need to get a headset to play with that. But so anyway, that's just a little bit about properties in NX. Something to play with. I'll probably make you in future tutorials or assignments, apply some materials and do a rendering for like an exam. But that's all for this tutorial, and I will see you next time. Thank you.